The grand chamber stretched far and wide with walls that glowed like stars in the night sky. Representatives from 47 different alien species filled the massive room. Some looked like insects with hard shells and many legs. Others were snake-like creatures that slithered across the floor. Some glowed with their own light and floated in the air like clouds. In the middle of all this stood Claire Morrison wearing a simple gray suit. She looked very plain compared to all the colorful and strange beings around her. Claire had been speaking for only 5 minutes when the head of the council interrupted her for the third time. His name was Vexthor, and he looked like a giant insect made of crystal. His mouth parts clicked together, making annoyed sounds. He waved one of his arms at her as if brushing away a fly. The room erupted with sounds of agreement. The snake creatures hissed happily. The floating gas clouds flickered in patterns that meant they were pleased. Only a few species stayed quiet and watched Claire with worried looks on their faces, or whatever passed for faces in their species. Claire stood very still for a long moment. Her face showed nothing. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small crystal device. She placed it carefully on the stand in front of her. The movement was so simple and quiet that half the room did not even notice it happen. When she spoke again, her voice was calm and steady. There was no anger in it. There was no begging or emotion at all. She just spoke facts like someone reading from a book. She said that humanity had served on the council for 30 years. During that time, humans had tried to work with everyone. They had followed every rule. They had contributed more than their fair share to the council. But despite all this, the council had never treated them as equals. Human ideas were always dismissed. Human concerns were always ignored. Human representatives were always interrupted and talked over. The council had made it very clear, through actions not words, that humans were not truly welcome as partners. She paused and let her words sink in like heavy stones dropping into deep water. The room fell completely silent. Even Vexthor stopped his clicking sounds. Claire touched the crystal device and it came to life. Holographic displays appeared all around the chamber, showing information that every species could read in their own way. The displays showed trade routes that humans had built. They showed resources that humans had shared. They showed medical research that humans had done. They showed defensive technologies that humans had created. The contributions of humanity over 30 years of membership. The numbers told a story that even the most dismissive council members could not ignore. 40% of all advances in quantum computing came from humans. 62% of new farming methods that had ended hunger on 7 worlds came from humans. The entire foundation of the council defensive network was built on encryption that humans had designed. Then Claire began listing the human facilities that would be closing. Research stations, medical centers, trade hubs, manufacturing complexes. She did not make threats or demands. She just stated simple facts in that same calm, professional voice. A counselor named Zara stood up quickly. She looked like a large cat that walked on 2 legs. Her species was known for being very smart and good at analyzing things. Her voice came through a translator device, and even the machine could not hide her concern. Claire smiled then, but it was not a warm, friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had already made their decision and was completely at peace with it. She pointed to the holographic displays still floating throughout the chamber. Each one showed a different human contribution to the galaxy, and beneath each contribution was a simple timer counting down. 90 days. The snake representative reared up high. His hood flared out wide, which meant he was angry or aggressive. His translator made rapid hissing sounds as he accused the humans of breaking contracts and not fulfilling obligations and facing legal consequences. Claire did not raise her voice at all. She simply activated another display. This one showed the complete text of the Galactic Membership Charter. Then she highlighted one specific section, the clause that allowed any member species to withdraw from the Council with 90 days' notice, as long as they fulfilled all existing contracts during that time. Vexthor leaned forward. His eyes reflected the holographic displays in 1,000 tiny copies. For the first time since Claire had entered the chamber, he seemed to actually see her as a real person. Claire picked up her data crystal and put it back in her pocket. She straightened her jacket. When she spoke, her words carried across the now silent chamber with perfect clarity. She said that humanity was officially withdrawing from the Galactic Council effective immediately. The 90-day notice period was starting now. During this time, all human personnel would complete their current assignments. All human facilities would be transferred or closed according to proper procedures. All contractual obligations would be fulfilled to the letter. After 90 days, there would be no human presence in council space. No human ships, no human stations, no human staff, nothing. She turned and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the absolute silence. Behind her, the holographic displays continued counting down. 89 days, 23 hours, and 42 minutes. The door closed behind Ambassador Claire Morrison with a soft sound. In the chamber she left behind, chaos erupted. Counselors shouted over one another. Translators buzzed and clicked and hissed in dozens of different languages. Emergency sessions were called. Legal experts were summoned. Economic analysts began desperately calculating what humanity's departure would mean. But in all the noise, a few of the quieter species sat thinking quietly. They already understood what the louder voices had not yet grasped. The humans had not stormed out in anger. They had not made threats or ultimatums. They had simply decided they were done, and they had followed every rule with perfect precision, which somehow made it infinitely worse. The first week after Claire Morrison left the council chamber passed in a strange way. Many delegates convinced themselves that the humans would change their minds. They thought this was just a way to get attention, or negotiate for better treatment. They thought that cooler heads would prevail, and everything would go back to normal. They were completely wrong. Dr. Richard Palmer stood in the center of the medical research facility on Kepler Station. He was supervising the careful packing of 30 years' worth of research equipment. The station had been humanity's greatest achievement in medical science. It was a place where human doctors had worked alongside alien healers to push the boundaries of medicine for all species. A colleague approached him. Her name was Dr. Sellerian, and she looked delicate with 6 thin hands and large eyes. She had worked with Richard for 12 years. Tears formed at the corners of her eyes. He had never seen her cry before. Richard looked at his old friend. His face was gentle but firm. He gestured to the rows of packed boxes being loaded onto transport ships. He pulled out a datapad and showed her the transfer orders. Every piece of research and every bit of data that belonged to humans was being carefully documented and packed and shipped back to human space. But more than that, every shared project was being carefully divided. The humans were taking only what was theirs. They were leaving behind everything that other species had contributed, along with detailed notes on how to continue the work without them. Selarin looked at the datapad, then back at Richard. Her translator buzzed softly as she asked why they had to leave. Why they could not work something out. Why they could not stay and fix things. Richard smiled sadly and shook his head. He said they had tried for 30 years. They had tried being patient. They had tried being professional. They had tried contributing more. They had tried everything they could think of. But the council had made it clear through constant dismissal and disrespect that humans would never be seen as true equals. So it was time to stop trying. 3,000 light-years away, the same scene played out with small differences at hundreds of human facilities. On the farming world of Verdant Prime, human specialists finished training their replacements in advanced growing techniques that had tripled food production. On the manufacturing hub of Forge 7, human engineers completed the transfer of quantum fabrication procedures, leaving behind detailed instruction. Manuals written in 17 different languages. Commander Lisa Chen oversaw the shutting down of the quantum defense grid from her post on Defense Station Alpha. The grid was humanity's gift to the Council. It was a network of early warning satellites that could detect hostile fleet movements across a third of the galaxy. Its encryption made it almost impossible to hack, and its maintenance had been entirely handled by human technicians. A Council security officer watched the shutdown procedures with growing alarm. His name was Torvak, and he came from a warrior species called the Krell. The Krell were one of the few species who had consistently treated humans as equals. Torvak had commanded joint operations with Lisa for 5 years. Lisa pulled up the system design on a holographic display. The quantum encryption was built on mathematical concepts that humans had pioneered. Without constant updates and maintenance from humans who understood the underlying science, the system would remain, working for perhaps 6 months before it started. Failing in cascading ways, she highlighted several sections of the computer code. She explained that the council could try to maintain it themselves. They could try to reverse engineer it. They could try to build something similar. But without the foundational understanding that humans possessed, it would be like trying to rebuild a house without knowing how the foundation was laid. Possible in theory, but incredibly difficult in practice. Torvok stared at the display. His species were famous warriors, but even they could see what this meant. The humans had built so much of the council infrastructure that their leaving would not be a small gap. It would be a massive hole that would take decades to fill. He tried one last time to appeal to reason. He asked Lisa if there was any way to convince the humans to stay. Any concessions the council could make. Any apologies that would be sufficient. Lisa finished shutting down her command console and picked up her personal belongings. When she spoke, her voice carried the same quiet finality that Claire Morrison had used in the council chamber. She said that apologies were nice, but they did not change anything. The council had spent 30 years showing humans exactly how they felt about them. 30 years of interrupted speeches. 30 years of dismissed proposals. 30 years of being treated as junior partners at best and incompetent children at worst. You could not undo 30 years of behavior with one apology. The trust was gone and it was not coming back. So the humans were leaving, and they were doing it properly and professionally, because that was who they were. But they were definitely leaving. By the end of the third week, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Humans were not sabotaging anything. They were not taking revenge. They were simply and methodically removing themselves from every aspect of galactic civilization. They were following every law and honoring every contract and leaving behind nothing but gaps that were only now becoming visible. Trade, routes that had relied on human shipping companies, scrambled to find replacements. Medical centers that depended on human-trained staff faced critical shortages. Research projects built on human theories ground to a halt as the humans who understood them left. And through it all, the humans said nothing more. They filed their reports. They completed their transfers. They quietly walked away. No complaints, no accusations, no final speeches about how they had been treated. Just silence and empty stations and the growing realization of what was being lost. By the fifth week, panic had begun to set in among certain parts of the council. The Merchants Guild was the first to break rank and send urgent messages to the council leadership about the economic impact of humanity's withdrawal. Their reports painted a harsh picture that many had refused to see before. Guildmaster Prexnall stood before an emergency economic council session. He was a round amphibian species known for being very good at business. His skin had lost its usual bright blue color and faded to a sickly gray, which showed severe stress in his species. He activated holographic displays that filled the chamber with economic data. Trade volume charts showed sharp declines. Supply chain diagrams revealed critical bottlenecks. Market projections predicted one disaster after another. High Counselor Vexthor tried to wave away the concerns with one of his upper arms, but his movements lacked their usual confidence. He said that surely other species could fill the gaps left by humans. Surely the economic impact was being exaggerated. Surely things would stabilize soon. Prexnall's throat sac inflated with agitation, which was a sign that he was holding back from shouting. He said no, things would not stabilize. The humans had not just participated in the economy. They had been the connections that made everything work. He pulled up another display showing human shipping routes. The routes were not the longest ones. They did not carry the most exotic goods, but they connected everything. Like threads in a web, human trade routes linked together different regions of the council, turning 3-week journeys into 3-day trips. Without those connections, the entire trade network would slow to a crawl. Counselor Zara, the cat-like analyst who had been one of the first to express concern, rose from her seat. Her tail moved sharply, showing her agitation. She said the economic situation was bad, but the medical situation was potentially catastrophic. Human doctors and researchers had been central to nearly every major medical advancement in the past 3 decades. A murmur ran through the assembled counselors. The medical sector had been easy to overlook when everyone was focused on economic concerns. But Zara's words brought reality crashing down on them. The therapy that extended lifespans for dozens of species had been developed with human researchers. The neural mapping techniques that cured supposedly incurable diseases had been pioneered at the human-run Kepler station, and now as human, medical staff left and took their knowledge with them. Those Advances were slipping away like sand through fingers. The military representative, General Thars, moved to the speaking platform. He was from the snake-like Srath species. His hood flared, showing serious concern rather than aggression. He said that while everyone was focused on economics and medicine, they were ignoring the most immediate threat. The defensive grid was failing. Without human maintenance, vast stretches of border space had already gone dark. The Council had no way of knowing if hostile forces were gathering at the borders. The early warning system that had given them days to respond to threats now gave them hours at best. He activated tactical displays showing the border regions. Large sections appeared blank or showed only partial data. Without proper monitoring, the Council was effectively blind to external threats, and there were always threats: pirates, smugglers, hostile empires waiting for signs of weakness. Vexthor's mouthparts clicked rapidly, which was a sign of severe agitation in his species. For weeks he had insisted that human contributions were exaggerated and could be easily replaced, but the evidence before him was impossible to deny. A younger counselor named Brightthought at Dawn spoke up. He was from the Luminar species and appeared as a cloud of glowing gas. His patterns translated to hesitant questioning. He asked how they had not noticed this before, how they had not realized how much they depended on humans, how this situation had been allowed to develop in the first place. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Because the answer was obvious to anyone who looked at the data honestly. The humans had built so much of the Council infrastructure over 30 years that they had become the foundation everything else rested upon. And when you remove a foundation, everything above it collapses. The chamber erupted in arguments. Some called for emergency measures to prevent human departure. Others demanded to know why no one had noticed the extent of human integration into Council systems. A few, like Counselor Zara, sat quietly, already understanding that it was too late. The humans had not just left. They had revealed simply by their absence how much the Council had relied upon them. Every empty station and every inactive system and every halted project was like a mirror showing the Council what they had taken for granted. Someone finally suggested, sending a delegation to Earth to negotiate, to offer concessions, to beg if necessary. Several counselors agreed immediately. They drafted messages. They prepared offers. They calculated what they could promise to bring the humans back. But Zara stood again, and her voice cut through the chaos. She said they were missing the point entirely. The humans had not left because they wanted better terms or more representation or higher status. They had left because 30 years of experience had taught them that the Council would never truly see them as equals. You could not negotiate your way out of that. You could not offer enough concessions to undo 3 decades of casual disrespect and dismissal. The humans were done trying to prove themselves. They were done hoping things would change. They had simply decided to walk away with dignity and build something better elsewhere. And the Council had no one to blame but themselves. Week 7 brought what historians would later call the cascade. It started with small failures. A research station here, a supply chain there. But failures in systems as connected as the Galactic Council had a way of multiplying. Each problem created 2 more in its wake. On the industrial world of Forge 7, production dropped by 40% in a single week. The quantum fabricators that humans had designed required constant fine-tuning and tiny adjustments that the departed engineers had made look easy. The replacement crews tried to follow the instruction manuals, but the manuals could not capture years of hands-on understanding. Chief Engineer Colvin stood in his facility and watched 20 years of work grind to a halt. He was a tall crystalline being from the Antaran species. He had worked alongside human engineers for 15 years, but only now did he realize how much of their knowledge had been unspoken and built into their very way of solving problems. He searched through the communication records looking for the contact information of the human engineer who had led his team. Her name was Kate Murphy, and she had been brilliant and patient. She had trained him personally, but when he tried to reach her, the message bounced back. Human communications with Council space had been completely severed as part of the withdrawal process. They were truly alone now. The medical crisis hit harder and faster than anyone had predicted. Dr. Sellerin found herself running the Kepler Station medical facility with half the staff and a tiny fraction of the expertise. The advanced therapies that had saved thousands of lives per year were now impossible to give. The equipment remained, but without the human doctors who understood. The science behind it, the machines, might as well have been useless sculptures. She stood in the main treatment area, surrounded by machines whose purposes she only partly understood. Patients with conditions that would have been easily treatable weeks ago now faced grim outcomes. Children born with genetic problems that human therapy could have corrected would now live limited lives. She remembered Richard Palmer's final words to her before he left. They were not bitter. They held no desire to see others suffer, just a simple statement of fact delivered with the same quiet professionalism that had marked humanity's entire departure. He had said that sometimes you have to accept that despite your best efforts, some relationships are not meant to work. The humans had tried for 30 years to be good partners. The council had made clear through consistent action that partnership was not what they wanted. So the humans were leaving, not with anger, not with revenge, just with the dignity of knowing their own worth. They had tried, and the council had made its choice. The defense situation got worse with frightening speed. Commander Torvak watched helplessly as the quantum defense grid experienced its first major failure. A section of border space representing nearly 1 billion square kilometers went completely dark and invisible to council sensors. Within days, pirate raids increased by 300% in the affected areas. Smugglers operated without fear, and worse intelligence reports suggested that the Kreeth Empire, which had been contained at the rim, was beginning to gather forces in areas the council could no longer monitor. Torvak called an emergency meeting of the Defense Committee. The mood in the room was grim. Without the early warning system, the council defensive fleets were reactive instead of prepared. They could respond to threats, but only after those threats had already struck. It was like fighting with your eyes closed. A young officer barely out of training asked the question everyone was thinking. Could they rebuild the defense grid without human help? Could they reverse engineer the quantum encryption? Could they create their own version of what the humans had built? The silence that followed was answer enough. In theory, yes, they could eventually recreate something similar. But it would take years, maybe decades, and it would be inferior to what they had lost. The humans had not just built a defense grid. They had pioneered the entire field of quantum encryption that made it possible. Without that foundational knowledge, the council was trying to rebuild a house without understanding how foundations work. By week 8, the full scope of the disaster had become impossible to deny. Economic analysts projected a 20-year recovery timeline, and that was assuming everything went perfectly. Medical experts estimated tens of thousands of deaths that could have been prevented over the next decade. Military planners presented scenarios that ranged from bad to absolutely catastrophic. Councillor Zara stood before the full council assembly. Her usual calm manner was replaced by barely contained fury. When she spoke, her words cut through the chamber like ice. She said they had brought this entirely upon themselves. Every single bit of it. She activated a display showing historical records of council sessions. She highlighted every time human proposals had been dismissed, every instance where human delegates had been interrupted or ignored, every vote where humanity had stood alone against the majority. High Councillor Vexthor tried to interrupt her, but Zara turned on him with a hiss that needed no translator. She said he had no right to speak. He had been one of the worst offenders. He had dismissed human concerns. He had interrupted human speakers. He had led the charge in treating humans as inferior partners. And now, when the consequences of those actions were undeniable, he wanted to debate and discuss and find someone else to blame. She pulled up one final display. It showed Ambassador Claire Morrison's speech, the one that had been interrupted and dismissed, the one where she had tried to warn them. The recording played in the silent chamber. Claire's calm professional voice explained concerns about species equality and the need for mutual respect and the dangers of taking any member species for granted. The council had dismissed it as human emotion and exaggeration. Now, with empty stations and failing systems all around them, those words sounded less like exaggeration and more like prophecy. The humans had tried to tell them, and absolutely no one had listened. Week 10 arrived like a falling star that everyone could see coming, but no one could stop. The council chambers that had once been filled with confident voices from 47 species now echoed with blame and despair. Emergency sessions had become normal. Each one addressed a new crisis that came from humanity's absence. High Counselor Vexthor stood at the central podium. His crystalline form seemed somehow dimmer than before. His mouth parts clicked slowly as he addressed the assembly, and for the first time in his long career, his voice carried uncertainty. He said they had tried to contact Earth. They had tried to open negotiations. They had tried to find some way to convince the humans to reconsider. He activated a holographic display showing the communication attempts, hundreds of messages sent to human space, each one formal, each one carefully worded to avoid sounding desperate. Request for dialogue, offers of renegotiation, proposals for new terms of membership. Every single message had received the same response. A polite professional acknowledgement followed by a restatement that humanity's withdrawal was proceeding according to the charter. No anger, no accusations. Just cold efficiency that was somehow more devastating than any hostile response could have been. Counselor Zara rose from her seat. Her tail moved sharply, showing controlled frustration. She said the council seemed to be missing the fundamental issue. The humans did not want to negotiate. They did not want concessions or apologies or better terms. They wanted to be done with the council entirely. And could anyone really blame them after 30 years of being treated as second-class members? She pulled up a different display. This one showed internal human communications that had been accidentally captured by council sensors, before the humans had cut all ties. Not secret material. Just everyday conversations between human workers as they prepared to leave. The recordings played and the council listened to human voices discussing their departure. There was sadness there. Genuine regret at leaving behind friends and meaningful projects, but there was also relief and a sense of quiet dignity. They were not running away. They were choosing to leave a situation that no longer served them. One recording in particular struck the assembly into silence. It was Dr. Richard Palmer speaking to a young human intern on the last day at Kepler Station. The intern's voice came through bitter about how the council had treated them. She said it was not fair that they had to leave, that they had done so much good work, that the council did not deserve to lose everything humans had built. Richard's response was gentle but firm. He said she was right that it was not fair. But fairness was not the point anymore. They had spent 30 years trying to prove their worth to people who had already decided humans were inferior. That was not a battle they could win because it was not based on facts or merit. It was based on prejudice. And you cannot logic someone out of a position they did not logic themselves into. So the only winning move was to stop playing the game entirely, to take their talents and their dignity and go build something better somewhere else, somewhere they would be valued from the start. The recording ended. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Each delegate processed what they had heard. The humans had not left out of spite or anger. They had left because they had finally accepted that the relationship was never going to change, no matter how much they contributed or how professional they remained. Guildmaster Prexnall stood. His skin color had slowly returned to its normal blue as panic gave way to resignation. He said they needed to face reality. The humans were not coming back. The economic damage was going to happen. The medical setbacks were unavoidable. The security vulnerabilities were real. They needed to stop wasting time on impossible negotiations and start focusing on damage control and long-term recovery. He was right, and everyone in the chamber knew it. The economic projections showed potential recovery paths, but all of them required decades of effort and massive resource investment. The medical situation would require training new specialists from the beginning, a process that would take generations. The defense grid could potentially be rebuilt, but it would be inferior to what the humans had created and would take years to put in place. General Thars, the military commander, moved to the speaking platform. His hood remained flat, showing contemplation rather than aggression. He said there was one more thing the council needed to understand. The humans had not left because they were weak or incapable of defending themselves. He pulled up tactical displays showing human defensive installations along the galactic rim. Not in council space anymore, but in the territories humanity had claimed for themselves. The installations were more advanced than anything the council possessed. They incorporated technologies that the humans had apparently been developing quietly while fulfilling their council obligations. The implications were clear and frightening. Humanity had not left because they needed the council. They had left because they had finally decided they were better off alone. Bright thought at dawn. The young Luminar counselor flickered in patterns that translated to painful realization. He asked what they would do now, how they would move forward, how they would recover from this disaster that they had brought upon themselves. The question hung in the air. What would they do? The answer, as it turned out, was the same thing that civilizations had always done when they made catastrophic mistakes. They would adapt. They would rebuild. They would move forward. But they would do it without humanity, because the humans had tried to be partners and the Council had treated them as inferiors. They had tried to contribute, and the Council had dismissed their efforts. They had tried to warn everyone, and the Council had not listened. And when humans finally decided they were done, they did not make grand speeches or issue threats. They simply followed the rules and packed their belongings and walked away with quiet dignity. High Counselor, Vexthor made one final attempt to contact Earth. The message was simple and stripped of all diplomatic pretense. He admitted the Council had been wrong. He admitted they had failed to treat humanity with proper respect. He asked if there was any possibility of reconciliation in the future. Any chance that wounds could be healed and relationships rebuilt. The response came 3 days later. Ambassador Claire Morrison appeared on the holographic display. Her gray suit was as crisp as ever. Her expression was professionally neutral. She thanked the counselor for his honesty. She acknowledged that admitting mistakes was difficult, but she said that some things once broken cannot be repaired. Trust was like glass. Once shattered, you might glue the pieces back together, but it would never be the same. The humans had given the Council 30 years to build that trust. The Council had spent those 30 years breaking it piece by piece. There was nothing left to salvage. Humanity wished the Council well in their future endeavors. But humanity's future would be separate. The transmission ended. Claire Morrison's face faded from the display, replaced by the seal of the Human Confederacy. A simple blue sphere with silver stars. The Council chambers fell silent. Outside the crystalline walls, the galaxy turned on its axis, indifferent to the politics of any species. The humans were gone. The countdown had reached 0. And the Galactic Council was left to contemplate the full weight of their mistake. They had not lost humanity in a war or to some catastrophe. They had driven them away through 1,000 small acts of disrespect, through casual dismissals and unexamined prejudices. And the worst part was that the humans had tried repeatedly to make it work, until they did not. Counselor Zara stood and walked to the viewing platform, looking out at the stars beyond the crystalline walls. Somewhere out there, humanity was building something new, something independent of the Council. They had taken their knowledge and their innovation and their quiet dignity, and they had simply moved on. She thought about Richard Palmer's words to his intern. Sometimes the most powerful statement is simply to stop participating. The humans had made their statement, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.